Welcome to the Sourcing Hero podcast, produced by Una, a group purchasing organization that empowers sourcing heroes, and Art of Procurement, the world's largest procurement podcast network. I'm your host, Kelly Barner. The goal of the Sourcing Hero podcast is to capture the epic stories of people who are rising up and beating the odds to create exceptional value within procurement, directly from those heroes themselves. Today, my guest here on the Sourcing Hero podcast is James Lowry. James is a senior advisor at the Boston Consulting Group and has the most extensive experience leading and innovating on behalf of diverse-owned businesses of anyone that I have spoken to date. And I have talked to a lot of people that specialize in this area. So, Jim, I am so pleased to have you with me today on the Sourcing Hero podcast.
I'm glad to be with you, Kelly.
Now, you have a lot of experience working in this area. I wonder if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about your history of advocating on behalf of minority-owned businesses, just to give people some context before we dig into the details today.
Yeah, let me talk about it pre-career in this area and after I got started and what drove me and what was my purpose in life. I think most people don't realize it, but in 1961, I'm giving my age away, I lived in Africa. I lived in Tanzania, and I saw poverty in its worst. And then I came back. I was part of the Peace Corps and management, and then I was associate director in Peru, and I saw poverty on a different continent, but in the Barriadas in Brazil and places like that. So it always had a profound impact on me. And I said that if I could do anything in my life, it could narrow the gap, could make it better for people less fortunate than myself. And so when I worked in Bed-Stuy, once again, I was dealing in the inner city of the United States, working at that time for Senator Bobby Kennedy, who believed in the same thing I believed in. We could do better. And then when he was assassinated, I went to a large consulting firm. And I didn't know what I was going to do. And then once I was exposed to the power and the skills and the toolkits that consulting would give you, I said, I'm going to use that to try and make a difference for as many people as I could. And I decided, because America is America and the free enterprise system, which I strongly believed in, living in Africa and places like that, I said, I think the best route is through business.
Yeah.
Through commercial growth of businesses, and just make sure more of the people who are growing businesses were brown and Asian American, Native American. That's what was my goal in life. And that it started from that early beginning, but I was motivated for those reasons. And that's why I devoted the rest of my life to it.
Which is an incredibly inspirational vision. And yet you've worked on a number of levels to actually drive change. So we have plenty of visionaries in the world, right? But you've been very focused on figuring out what are the things that will move the lever? What are things that will actually drive a discernible difference for these businesses and the opportunity that they have to participate in the business system, which in some cases does bring them into contact with government entities, whether it's federal level, state level, city level, and then of course, all of the opportunity that comes from the private sector. So much of the effort that's being driven today is through government mandate. And so that brings us to this interesting point on the difference between public sector impact and options versus what's happening in the private sector. I would love to get your thoughts on that.
Well, that's a great question, because that got me started was with the federal government. I was asked by Juanita Krebs, who was the Secretary of Commerce, to write the first and only minority business strategy for the United States government. So I did that in 1978. We then created MBDA, the Minority Business Development Agency, and I started doing work in the federal government. And I realized the power of the federal government in terms of the size of their budgets and the policies that were created, like you articulated, could make a big difference. But very soon thereafter, I realized if you're going to have permanent change, then you've got to go to the private sector. Because I concluded, and I wrote this in my first report, that the government can be the catalyst for change.
Yeah.
But at the end, if you're going to have lasting change, it has to be the private sector. So I literally shifted. Not that I gave up working in the public sector, but I shifted to the private sector. And I was fortunate enough to have as a client Pepsi Cola, who believed in the same thing I did. And so we designed, I think, one of the first minority business programs in the country. It was PepsiCo because it was not only Pepsi Cola, it was Frito-Lay and other companies a part of the holding company. And then the other one, which I think made a major difference, is I designed the minority business program for Ford Motor Company. And at that time, Ford was the only company in America, this was 1984, that did over $1 billion with minority business.
Wow.
But it showed you something, I can smile about it. They're all my friends. Soon after Ford did $1 billion, Chrysler did $1 billion. General Motors did $1 billion.
We
And then you
love
had the
that spirit of competition, don't
that's
we?
it. But I saw it. And then the offshore companies started. Nissan and Toyota did a fantastic job, and they did $1 billion. So I saw that happening, and I saw larger minority businesses being developed. And many of the young people who have been on Wall Street, been in big consulting firms, left to create their own businesses because these big automotive companies were willing to give them big contracts. And so I saw $400 million companies, 600 million, a couple of $1 billion companies because of the commitment that corporate America made in trying to make a difference.
Now, one of the things that you just said, I actually want to pause and focus on because I think not only is it incredibly important, but it's something that doesn't get talked about enough. Even within the corporate space, when we think about the incentives that are laid out to drive the participation of diverse owned businesses in our supply chains, it tends to stop at just that participation. So we might say, well, we invited them to sign up for our portal, or we invited them to participate in a bid. We invited them to submit information. But participation is not truly your goal. You're looking for growth. You're looking for the opportunity for these businesses to exist, get a foothold, and then thrive to the point where they're growing. Why is that distinction around growth versus participation so important?
Well, let's be honest. I'm going to be honest with your viewers, but
I would hope so.
yeah, it all depends on the CEO. And the CEO and others in the C-suite. Because if you don't have the CEO and sometimes the board, but the CEO prompted by the board maybe, or a couple of members on the board, and they're not willing to pay the price of not only getting a program off the ground, but supporting the program with finances, with insights, with policies, and really incentivizing this people in the C-suite down to the buyers, you won't have a successful program. You just will not. And I've been so blessed to work with some of these CEOs who are very sincere on doing it. We're part of this. We're part of the National Minority Supply Development Company, and really would take the message to the business roundtable and really share what the benefits were. And when I'm still selling it. I mean, it's part of me, right? But I said, it's not just about the minority entrepreneurs who might get rich, but that's the free enterprise system. That is what we believe in. And I believe in, entrepreneurs should be rewarded for their work and efforts and their products and services. But it's not just them. It's also the community where most of the companies reside. It's also their consumer base. Part of what I sell, Kelly, you kind of asked the question, why do you do it? Well, there's a tremendous $1 trillion market out there with people of color. So in certain industries, it makes more sense than others. Heavy manufacturing is hard to tell that story. But when you're a consumer goods company or a financial service company, it goes right to the bottom line. I think the other thing is that when you stabilize communities, everybody wins. So you have the same CEOs on all the, the nonprofit big boards in the cities they all come together to make the city of Chicago better, the city of New York better. But if they don't really deal with minority business and creating jobs and creating businesses through minority businesses, they're losing. Society loses.
And if we think about this idea that growth must be part of the objectives, what you really end up with is a huge expansion from what we typically have today, where Maybe you have some small entrepreneurial organizations that are brought in. Maybe you have somebody that starts to reach sort of the mid-sized part of the market. But you're saying, no, we need diverse owned business participation and success and growth at every single tier of the economy, because that creates that pathway. And one of the challenges of that, and this is something I've heard versions of this story too many times to feel comfortable with. You have a diverse owned business who has gone through the process. They are certified, they are successful, they're gaining traction and growing. And then they reach the point where they need financing.
Mm-hmm.
If they accept financing and diversify or dilute their ownership, they may lose their status. If they go public, which in many cases is sort of the ultimate goal for every entrepreneur, you start a company, you want to grow it big enough that it can go public, that dilutes ownership. And it becomes sort of an unintended consequence, I think, that stops growth. How do we address this issue of financing while preserving ownership and leadership identity so that you're still feeding the program and supporting the communities without closing off sources of financing to these businesses?
I think you asked me two questions. Well, let me deal with the first one very quickly. Why? Okay, what is the
Yeah.
why for? And the bottom line is that we have a wealth disparity in the United States that's going to get larger and larger. We have $1 trillion wealth disparity between people of color and the rest of the population. It's going to get much larger, okay, when you got AI and you have tech growing the way it's growing and certain industries growing. If minorities are not part of that industry, we're not going to be part of the solution for dealing with a very serious problem that confronts our society. So let's deal with growth, why we have to have growth, and we have to think in terms of speed. This can't wait for 20 years, because if we put it on the back burner, that wealth disparity is going to get that much larger, and it's going to be too late. The other thing that I used to say in my speeches, and I really believe it, is say, look, whether we like it or not, by the year 2043, the majority of the people in the United States are going to be people of color. So if you got a population where the majority of people are going to be of color and they're not part of the free enterprise system of the United States, we got a serious problem. So then you take us to capital. Now, sometimes I can get controversial on this. I would say capital is a problem, but I think too often the minority entrepreneurs put that up as excuse why they can't grow. And so I've had a course at Kellogg School of Business since 1996. I have 3 lectures. I bring in people from all over the country, the top minority businesses. I mean, they have to have, revenues of X. They have to demonstrate success and they will always say, Mr. Lowry, Professor Lowry, if we could just get more capital, I could grow. I said, no, you got to do more than that. First place, you got to have a plan for, I don't care who you are, that a banker is going to say, I looked at your plan and it makes sense. I'm willing to back you for some money. There's billions of dollars out there in funds right now, with sitting on money to invest. Okay, so there's a disconnect there, but there's billions of dollars in the hands of founders who have $200 million funds. I know one has $1.4 billion sitting on it. They're looking for the minority, but the minority's got to come up with a plan. They have to be in the right industries. They have to have the right team. And as we say in business school, they got to have the right jockey, because you put all these factors in there. So I'll put my money into it, but I'm not going to put my money into anything just because it's black or brown. They have to show me they can take my money and make it 10x or 11x, or that's the free enterprise system again. And so stop complaining, get your act together. But what you brought up was so important. I'm not going to put my money into any firm, irrespective of color, gender, sexual orientation, none of that, unless they think big. If they think that growth for them is growing 2x over 10 years, that is not the person I want to work with. That is not the person I'm going to invest my money into. So I think the biggest thing and this is why I preach in my course, this is why I preach all over, let's have the mindset a mindset of $1 billion, because it's just as easy to run a $1 billion business as a 1 million. I think the small business, to your point, is very important for the free enterprise system. I think even turning around the economy now, many small businesses should even grow to that first level that you talked to, the second level. But even there, they have to have the mindset they want to grow and not be satisfied just having enough money to pay bills and pay for colleges. Maybe it's American way. I'm a strong believer. But when I look at the numbers and the gap between people of color and the rest of the population, then I'm saying we got to do something different, and we have to do it quickly, or we're going to have more serious problem in the future.
I like the fact that you're willing to challenge conventional thinking on this, because
Always.
when I listen to you talk about how the free enterprise system works, if having more money was all you needed to be successful, we would have very different companies in our market today. There are
Yes.
plenty of companies that people have thrown money at by the bagful, by the truckful, and yet they're gone because they didn't have the plan. They didn't have a value proposition. They couldn't scale and operationalize.
Right.
And that's an issue that crosses every single sector of society. And so it's making sure that the opportunity exists, right? That there are structures in place to connect opportunities with people that have the ideas. But you also spoke earlier about the importance of the CEO. You
Yes.
gave us a couple of examples, and you said it all comes down to the CEO. There are a lot of companies today that have supplier diversity, or more specifically, minority-owned supplier business programs. What advice do you offer to those CEOs or even to their boards about what they need to do if they truly believe in these programs and want to see them be successful?
The first suggestion I would say, hire a good consultant. No, I'm just kidding. No, but seriously, because I say that tongue in cheek, but I also see that because there are a lot of consultants out there who said they're experts, but they're
Yes.
not. Okay, they can put the shingle out and they say they've done it, but they haven't. And so when I tell many of my corporate clients, no disrespect to the other people, and I don't even say the competition. I mean, BCG and the others, couple of companies I could mention are in a class by themselves. But even the consultants who specialize in this, I said, did that person affect change where they were before? If there's no impact, if you can't see a change, then don't hire them. I don't care where they went. And I said, that's how I've survived over the years. That's why you mentioned that I have this record, because everywhere I go, I can show where I made a difference in that company. But how did I do it? Thank God blessed that I went to a big consulting firm that I learned the skills of how to work with people in the C-suite, how to work with the CEOs, how to deal with the problem from both sides. Because every CEO has their own problems.
Of course.
So I said, here's what you should do. Deal with the givens in the situation. Most people don't want to deal with the givens.
Yeah.
But just like I have no problem, because everybody knows I've dedicated my life to try and grow minority businesses. But I said, first tell them, don't come to me and ask for all the support, money, and a guaranteed market unless you got a plan. Two, be willing to pay the price, Mr. CEO of the minority company, to know the organization, know the culture, know the board, know what they're saying, know what they're planning to do over the next 3 to 5 years, and be in what I would call the sweet spot where you're going where they're going. They don't need you to go where they've been. They're surviving in a very competitive global economy. You have to be a partner in their growth aspirations. If you're not there, don't cry, because you're not helping them. Form the relationships both inside and outside the corporation, because you mentioned financing. I will ask people who are my very best friends now, who've come through my program, what was your relationship with your bank? They said, what? I said, what was your relationship with your bank? I mean, how many dinners did you have? How many breakfast meetings? When did you talk to them before you needed the money? Because when you come to them in a desperate state, they don't want to deal with you. But if you formed a personal relationship around your business, then you're in a better position. The same thing with the second most important. So you got 3 key players in corporate America. You got the CEO, you got the people in the C-suite, and you have the chief purchasing officer.
Yeah.
Most of these people don't even know the names of the chief purchasing officer. Okay. The chief He's probably, the second or third most powerful person. They don't even know their names. They haven't done their homework. They don't even know where he went to school. So you got to form relationships. I think the other thing you have to do is do your research. Most of our entrepreneurs, God bless them, they're trying to survive. So they got products or services, but they don't do the research.
Mm,
Do the research on the industry. Do the research on the company. Do the research on the skill sets they're needing. Your skill set's going to be different. We're talking about coding. Is coding going to be available? It's necessary in 3 to 5 years. We're training kids to be coders. Tech is changing. So go where you have to go, but you can only do that through research. But the biggest thing, which I keep saying over and over, is you got to have a growth mindset.
yeah.
So when you come in there, you got to have that growth. You can't be satisfied. And so I have an alumni group from that same group at Kellogg. God bless them. I love them. We're going to meet again in Atlanta at the national convention. We meet before everybody. I got 800 strong. They're the best minority businesses in the country. Their whole slogan is, we don't want to create millionaires. We want to create billionaires. So that is the mindset that we're trying to work on. Kellogg has supported me. The dean has supported me. We want to create a cadre of potential billion-dollar minorities. And then I was thinking, and maybe it goes back to my work in South Africa, we're dealing with different races and everything, and I don't want to get political or anything like that. But if we had more people working together, creating wealth and helping people less fortunate than we are, then we would have a better society. And we can use business to bind people. Army used to do that. When the U.S. Army, when we had integration, we had different army. More Black people had basic relationships with other people of color, non-colored, who were lasted for years. So
Right.
I think business can do the same thing. That if we can do that, and then we can all say, "Hurrah!" We said we made a difference, and that's why I keep going in my age. I will never quit. I believe and this is my purpose in life. I've learned a lot. I want to share all I learned. I write books, I write articles, I write LinkedIn stuff because I think it's so important. And the people that you're dealing with are so important in terms of the key operators, the key influencers, the change agents. And there's nothing better than working for me, working with those people. Now, one of the questions I don't want to lose it, but it brings a smile to my face back to 85. I think it was 85 I did it. You said, what about losing your certification as a minority? Because I said this. I said two things that stand out for me as I look back over my many years in business. One, most companies now can't survive unless they merge. They can't. They just.
Yeah.
We're seeing it every day. We're seeing record companies. We're seeing banks. We're seeing airlines. What are we talking about? Albertson and they're merging. I mean,
That's
everybody's
right.
merging. Minorities don't merge. That you can't grow minorities unless you merge. You can't get to the critical size unless you merge. Now, on the other issue, one of the things I did when I was doing work at Ford, I dealt with the reality that many of the companies that were coming to Detroit were getting great support from the big three and had special relationships with the banks in Detroit. But they were all loans. They were loans.
Mm.
And then when the big three start, how automotive, when it goes up and it goes down,
Oh, yeah.
they don't care what color you are. So they don't care, right? They will squeeze that minority firm like anybody else. So I said, we got to get equity.
Yeah.
We have to get equity. So that's when I designed, with the help of several other people, designed the growth initiative. And basically, it was this very simple process that you could have 51% owned and operated by a minority, but you could also have 49% have equity investors from institutional investors, not individuals, but institutional investors, that you could get equity into the thing because you're going to need equity to grow.
Right.
Well, we've gone back and forth. It's still in existence. That growth initiative is allowed firms to become certified as minority firms. One company you should know about is Ariel Capital Alternatives. And it was set up, with big investments from Wall Street. They have $1.4 billion based on that principle. So they're going out buying existing large white firms putting their people on board, putting their money on there. So they now own 51% of that company. It is now minority certified.
And I think where that ties back to sort of the key of your message is if the goal is not creating millionaires, but instead the goal is creating billionaires and creating more of them all the time,
Right.
that financing and equity absolutely has to be a part of it,
Absolutely.
because otherwise we're going to get to that lower tier where companies say, hey, we have some certified minority owned businesses. Check. We did what we said we were going to do, but it's not getting to that growth piece. In order to
Absolutely.
reach the growth piece, there has to be more to it.
Right. And when you think that, the people I know who happen to be very wealthy, but they're bigger than that. I mean, Dave Stewart, he's at a tech company. Uh, you know, uh, Jose Mas, who happens to be minority, he has a construction company. But they've created so many jobs. See, that's what gets me upset because people have short memories. They think in terms of quarters or halves.
Yes.
But I could tell you all the great things that these two great gentlemen have done. One happens to be black, one happens to be Hispanic, for their communities. The number of jobs they created, the number of spinoffs they created, the number of investments they have made into other people, the training that they have given to the next generation. So I think America has to accept it's a rippling effect.
Yeah.
John Rogers, I remember when he started with his company and he brought, Melly Hobson on. How many people? He has his own scholarship program for kids. So we have to have both a short view and a long view. If we don't do that, we're going to suffer.
Now, to that point, Jim, sort of on that inspirational note, we always round out each of these conversations with, we consider it a tradition. Everybody that comes on the show the
Right.
first time answers these questions. So we're officially going to initiate you.
Uh-uh.
But let me give you two questions. You can pick either one, and there are
Okay.
no wrong answers. So either what does the idea of a sourcing hero mean to you? Or if you'd like to stay sort of broader and more visionary, what do you think heroism looks like in a business context?
Well, for sourcing, let me deal with the first question
Sure.
here. I think we all set goals. This is we've been trained in business school and business. And I think you got to set your own goals, and it might vary from company to company. But I'm saying you will be a hero if you hit the goals and really go past the goal and exceed your goals. That's what y'all can do, and you leave behind not only the achievement of the goals, but you did it with quality.
Yeah.
You did it with honor. You did it legally. You did all the terms that we would agree have to be met, and then you do it. And if you do that, you go to bed and you feel good. So that's what I do. I said this the other day, at a BCG, cadre meeting of all the leaders who happen to be of color in BCG. I said, look, I'm in my 80s, and I think, I've devoted my whole life to this. I think I've achieved a lot in this. I've affected change in a lot of corporations, governments, both federal, state, local. I said, so I feel good because if I meet my maker and I've done it and I feel that I had the impact, I feel good. So I can meet my maker. I think that's very important. I think, but for the larger question, I think that we all have to think beyond, like I said, the next quarter.
Mm.
We have to. And I think, and sometimes people said, and I take it as a compliment, kinda, they would say, Jim, you wrote this in 1982. Okay. We're now 2024. Why didn't people listen to you in 19, your first report for Juanita Krebs and Jimmy Carter? Why didn't they follow that? If we'd have followed what you wrote in 1984, we'd be so much stronger now. And I'm not saying it would have ameliorated the crime that we have, but it sure would have made it easier. I'm not saying it's not going to create jobs over what we seek to seek in terms of our goal setting, but we would have more jobs created. And so I'm just saying, let's do both. Let's deal with the immediacy of crime, the immediacy of lack of growth, the immediacy of lack of capital. Let's do that. And it's a Monday morning kind of thing. But we also have to have a mindset. This is for the great, nation that we have called the United States. And to make it stronger in the next 20 years going forward, I won't be here, but the next 20 or 30 years, so we can look back and say we played a part in making this better over the next 30 years and really making a real impact on our great, great country.
Now, Jim, you mentioned earlier you've written books, you give speeches, you write articles, you post. If people have joined us for this conversation and they would like to follow along as you continue to create content or even explore some of the content that's already out there, what is the best place for them to go in order to see it?
I would say LinkedIn. I mean, I wrote a book with a guy, Lynn Greenhall, called Minority Business Success for Stanford Press. It's still available. It was a labor of love. You had these. He has a program at Dartmouth. I have one in Kellogg, and we agreed almost every page. So there was an easy write, but it's still available. So if you want the basics of how you want to grow a minority business program, it would be that. My personal book is called, Change Agent. Then it tells about me and what I learned. And I will say this to, BCG, and I would say it to McKinsey where I first started. I couldn't have made the impact I had if I hadn't had the skill set that they gave me. And at BCG, I couldn't have done what I've done if I didn't have the partnership. I was a senior partnership there who helped me. So I think that that's another thing, that I would always be forever grateful for that. But, I've been blessed. So I'd say LinkedIn. I usually write one piece a month on my thoughts, so when it comes around June 10th or Martin Luther King Day, and I reflect on it or something I see is happening in the business community. And to show you what keeps me going, just, because I'm old, I sound younger, but I'm old. My back's old and everything. But I still get on planes. I'm driven. I don't have to work, but I want to work. I want to make a difference. But it's these small things. I'm in a club and leaving DC, after this meeting at BCG. I get in the club, and this woman looks at me and she smiles, and I said, I know her, but I didn't know where. And she stuck out her hand. She said, Jim, I can't thank you enough for all you've done for us. And your writings have really made a difference for me, and I think for a lot of other people. And I follow you, and many people do follow you on LinkedIn. So thank you so much. I mean, I was almost to tears, and I said, I'm going to keep going. She was a vice president of a major defense, manufacturing company. I mean, a senior person. And I said, then it's worth it. But LinkedIn.
Absolutely. And I'll say thank you as well for the opportunity to have this conversation, to reach a new group of people. We will link to your LinkedIn profile from today's show notes. So I definitely encourage everybody to go find that, follow Jim, read his past sharings, and of course, look forward to future ones. Jim, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you, Kelly, so very much. It was my pleasure. I had fun.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast. Join us again next time for more true stories of sourcing and business heroism performed by your colleagues and peers. Look for the Sourcing Hero wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe. Finally, don't forget, sourcing heroism is taking place all around us every day. Keep your eyes open and you're bound to see it. Until next time, I'm your host, Kelly Barner. Stay well, and always remember that you can be a hero too.